Hello and welcome everyone to Talk on Movie Talks. I'm here with Matt, aka War Champ on Letterbox. Matt, we just watched two Paul Verhoeven movies. First of all, how are you? And overarching, how did you like the movies?
I'm doing well, thank you. And I have to say I enjoyed these movies. I tend to enjoy dystopian psychological thrillers, I guess might be a way to categorize these types of films. I had a good time watching them.
Yeah, these were really interesting, and we were talking a bit about it. I think as a director, Paul Verhoeven's really interesting. And I didn't specifically ask you, but of the Verhoeven movies you saw previously, and I think the two that you had seen were RoboCop and Starship Troopers. Positive feelings after watching those?
Actually, I have not seen RoboCop. I've seen
Okay.
Total Recall and Starship Troopers.
Oh, okay.
When I first saw Total Recall, I remember like not exactly getting it fully. Like I understood what was happening, but I remember thinking it was a little cheesy and uh I guess I wasn't really used to his style. But then when I saw Starship Troopers, I kind of went in knowing uh kind of like what to expect, and I had to say I enjoyed that one a lot more.
Starship Troopers is such an interesting movie. Um, and I don't know if you had read this, Matt, but apparently, because Verhoeven is from Netherlands, which was maybe more closely affected by World War II, I guess he had grown up privy to a lot of the German propaganda films, and that was his inspiration for Starship Troopers, which I think is a really interesting backstory for that movie. And when you look at it through that lens, it's really kind of brilliant what he did there.
I did not know that, but yeah, that makes sense. And the movie feels like it's like an American propaganda type movie. It's like,
Mm.
they're like it's like they're encouraging you to try and join the military, and then you're seeing, everyone just get blown up and how terrible it really is while they're making it out to be this really great thing. And that's yeah, I've seen that a lot in, different World War II movies that I've watched.
Yeah, I think it's like really cutting edge satirical, and I'm really excited to go over Showgirls for that very reason, to kind of get your perspective, because I think he's a very intelligent and sly director, and I think a lot of the nuances can sometimes go unchecked. So I think discussing a film like a Paul Verhoeven movie, there's probably a lot of things that you caught that I didn't catch. So I'm really excited to go over that. And also Basic Instinct, for the fact that Sharon Stone is not an actress that I think I've seen in any other movie besides this one, and I was quite frankly blown away by the performance she was able to give in that film. I don't know what your thoughts were.
Yeah, yeah, Showgirls definitely had interesting themes that I think will be great to discuss. And Instinct was, definitely kind of, I wouldn't say centered around Sharon Stone, but she definitely makes the movie what it is. And, it ends up, the movie's kind of about her character, and I guess like a manipulative type of individual that seems to be able to wrap everyone around her fingers in this kind of entrancing way, which is super cool to watch.
I couldn't agree more. And I think and we touched upon this a little bit as we were discussing these movies prior to recording, but these two are definitely distinct from the majority of Verhoeven's filmography because they're not kind of set in a futuristic setting. They're both like modern day when they were filmed. And I think it may be slightly less satirical, or perhaps maybe I just didn't pick up on it as much. From your viewing, did you have that same kind of feeling that they seemed distinct from Verhoeven's other films?
Yes. In the sense that they, aren't futuristic and kind of showing this dystopian world. It's more like the current world, or, like for Showgirls, the like world of Las Vegas and the performance, then the type of world people live in is kind of a dystopian place, similar to, like what people would say about somewhere like Los Angeles. But one thing I would say that I thought was similar amongst them was the acting, and it's not that it's bad at all. I mean, you can watch it, and like that was the thing about when I first watched Total Recall. I thought the acting was like a little strange and like cheesy-ish. And then as I watched more of his movies, like after Starship Troopers, I was kind of like, okay, he's definitely doing this on purpose, I feel like this is not bad acting. It's just maybe a little over exaggerated for a reason. And I don't know exactly what reason that is. Maybe it's a part of the satirical dystopian type feel he's trying to get across.
Yeah, I personally, I agree with you. I that was the only thing I could put my finger on, is that it was too, because it's almost like as you're saying you're being sarcastic, and you have like a certain inflection to your voice to kind of let the person next to you in on the fact you're being sarcastic. It almost feels like he's doing that through his actors, which is really unique, and it's a completely different style, but it's reminiscent of a Robert Bresson, and also I don't remember the name of the director, but he has done The Lobster and Killing of a Sacred Deer. How he directs actors to, they almost, it's like a very ethereal type of like something is not normal. If you've seen any of his movies, which is, it's always interesting to see a director who does that with the performances in his movies. Verhoeven definitely does that in basically all the movies I've seen of his as well.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me too, and this is just something that I'm probably more familiar with because I used to be really into watching older movies, but it reminds me of like 40s and 50s, especially melodramas, where everyone's kind of overacting, and in that you're watching them and it's like they're an actor, kind of, but you're also drawn into the movie in a way. It's weird. So like it can be like perceived as, they're overacting. This is weird, and it can also be perceived as like he's obviously telling them to do this on purpose, and then you got to try and figure out, why is he doing that?
Exactly. And as we dive deeper into Showgirls, I think it was a unique combination of what was going on with the acting, with the story itself, why people were able to kind of write it off so quickly, and that word of mouth, I think, greatly impacted the film as a whole. We were discussing, I looked it up just prior to the recording. Showgirls netted around 39 million with a budget of 40 to 45 million. So, and that sounds like a loss, and it is, but it's actually probably a much bigger loss than even those numbers dictate, just because a lot of that is not considered into the budget, but rather goes into the marketing of a film, and that can put the actual expenses closer to like 2 to 2.5. So, I mean, we're talking like close to 50 million or over 50 million lost on that film. But it's a really, really unique bird for sure, Showgirls, because, you know, I was familiar with the fact that his acting is not the norm. But the way that, is it Elizabeth Berkley, the lead actress?
In Showgirls, yes, I think that's right.
I was so thrown off by not only her character but her acting, to where probably like the first half of the film, she was just not a very likable main character for it. Did you feel the same at all with the lead actress?
It was it was hard to explain. So for me, um, I didn't really like her, but I didn't like hate her. I was just kind of indifferent. And the thing about this movie is that a lot of it to me was predictable. Like I just could kind of foresee that, she was going to rise in this industry, going from the strip club to uh, this big Vegas show, and then she was getting involved with all these like seedy characters, and you can kind of see it coming. Um, but yeah, the way she acted, like that first scene where she's getting really mad and kind of banging her car. And the initial girl who's her friend, comes up to her, and then they kind of become friends. I didn't maybe care a lot for her, but I think for me, the movie ended up being more about the whole Vegas uh like universe, like the people that live in it, kind of like a Boogie Nights type thing.
I can definitely see that, and on the character study aspect of it, though, like you said, I think the story as a whole was trying to be a much broader scope where it wasn't just Elizabeth Berkley's story. My focus followed that because I thought that was what he was trying to tell, and it didn't start to occur to me until like over halfway that it was a much broader scope. I will say though, because I was kind of looking at it that way, near the end I was able to kind of make some connections between the story arc of Black Swan and this film. Have you seen Black Swan? And I guess, did you see any similarities as well?
I saw Black Swan a very long time ago, and honestly, I would not be able to remember enough to like discuss it like to a great extent. But from what I remember, yes, it's about if I remember right, she's like a dancer as well, like maybe like a ballerina or an ice figure skater, and she kind of rises up in the industry, and you kind of know there's going to be a downfall, kind of like this movie as well.
Yeah, and like the way that Elizabeth Berkley kind of started to, like, her wanting to get to the top kind of started to override her good character, and like how she pushed the main girl. That was like one of the biggest, like, oh, you know, to see her kind of fall into the dark side was the moment that I made that connection, which is kind of interesting. I have no idea whether this movie inspired that at all, and there might have even been like a subject material or like a source material rather that Black Swan was inspired by. But I do think it's interesting that they share that common ground. Aside from the fact that this is box office not entirely successful, I think what allured you to this movie that I found very interesting as well was the fact that this has such mixed ratings on Letterboxd, is very polarizing, and I think after finishing it, that is very much to be expected, and I can totally see why a lot of people fall on one side or the other on the fence on this film.
Yeah, me too. Because it's a mix, in my opinion. Like kind of what I was saying to you before we started. Like the plot line and her character development isn't the best, but what I got out of the movie and why I ended up enjoying it, despite all the times I had to be like, why is this happening? This is kind of random, doesn't really add up. It was just I want to shout out first, like the cinematography, especially at the very beginning when you get those flashing neon colors. It's a lot like Spring Breakers. I'm a big fan of that type of thing. But aside from that, I really like when movies seem to have something bigger to say about a certain like world within the world, like the LA show business, or like Perfect Blue, like we discussed last time. That was kind of a similar, told in a different way, but it was still about this rise to fame and then how that can be detrimental. um, and this movie, I think a lot. I think the important, or what I would say I got out of the character development part, is this weird sexual type plot that was like a subplot with her character. Like when she comes in, she's very like stands up to everyone, preventing them from trying to take advantage of her in a sexual way. And then it's like after she gets with that creative director, the guy who kind of looks like Tom Cruise, I would say is like the best way to describe him. It's like a flip switches and she totally changes. And I think that in terms of character, like we were discussing a minute ago, that was the part that stood out to me.
Yeah, the guy I believe you're talking about, and I'm not sure if I'm gonna pronounce his name right. I think it's Kyle MacLachlan, and if I'm not mistaken, he's in a few David Lynch projects. I recognized him because he's in Blue Velvet, but it was very very interesting, and I think there's something to be said about that about occurrences like that happen in the real world. And I think we can speak about like how consistent the movie was, but in a lot of actual persons who work in fields like this, which I don't know if this would be a correct categorization, but it's sex work slash sex work adjacent. For some people, it almost becomes you weaponize your sexuality, and like that seems to be like something that Elizabeth Berkley was trying to avoid, and then once she sees the power of it in this industry, almost kind of tries to utilize it to her benefit. And I think that was one of the interesting and important points that Paul Verhoeven was trying to make with this film. Did you get anything out of that as well, Matt?
Yeah, and it was an interesting part for me was at the end, you figure out that she was, a prostitute before this all happened. And, I that's something that you could say was a little predictable, but I actually didn't that's something I didn't see happening. And so you think, okay, well, so she came here to Vegas to try and start a new life. She's a really good dancer, but she's very against any type of sexual like innuendos or comments towards her. It's like she's repressing that. And then in the infamous pool scene with the character you just mentioned, Kyle MacLachlan, it's like she's like it's very strange. It's like she's releasing some type of inner like repression or something within her. And then, she's all of a sudden like doing coke in his room a little bit before she leaves. And then, she ends up pushing the kind of star actress. I think her name was like Crystal Connors down the stairs, and you just see her turn from this what was supposed to be what she was portraying as like a good girl into this, manipulative like caricature you would see in a movie like this. Basically a mini version of Crystal Connors. And I think it's interesting that she told her, she's like, at one point at that restaurant, she's like, "You're just a younger version of me." And, she was right. So there's like, I think that was an interesting aspect to the story.
I completely agree. And I think in some ways that works on a much broader scope where like the intoxication or it's intoxifying, like the power or the journey to possess power or fame or what have you. And it makes a lot of sense to have that progression work, and it was really good character arc done on behalf of Paul Verhoeven and the scriptwriter as well, because you've seen it done, and I think it was done pretty well in this film. I do want to say, for me, the most impactful and possibly best performance did come from Crystal Connor, and I don't know what one thing I want to throw to you, just because this might just be my personal experience. It seemed like she wasn't quite like following the same direction as a lot of the other characters were. It seemed like she was playing it a lot more straight than other actors in this film. I want to ask you, did you get that perspective as well? And I guess whose performance most impressed you?
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Especially what stood out to me was the way she looked. Crystal Connor's character like looked at other actors. Like it looked like when she was looking at Elizabeth Berkley's character, she just looked like she wanted to like eat her or sleep with her. Like that look of like she wants to consume her or something like that. Like a very like predatory slash uh like sexual type of vibe. And then with the whole, especially at the beginning when she, gets McLaughlin to do the dance in the backstage, I definitely thought I really did enjoy her character, and I thought, in other ways too, like the way she uh, teased Elizabeth Berkley's character and like made fun of her and got her mad, and it was kind of like she was the one, like Crystal Collins was the one really dealing the cards. It was as if she controlled the producers as well, because she was the star of the show, and I think she really pulled it off. Like in terms of acting, I think she had the best performance, and I think that's kind of like by and large she had the best performance, because when I think of the other characters, they just don't, in my mind, have as much personality. They kind of serve a purpose, and that's kind of it. Where she was kind of like a star of the movie, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to your point where you said it felt like she was kind of dealing the cards. I mean, I think at the end it seemed as though the script was almost trying to reveal the fact that everything was calculated. That Crystal Connors was almost from the very beginning, like she was able to devise this plan to get Elizabeth Berkley to replace her, basically, which makes her seem like this brilliant genius. But what I kind of want to ask, because I what I wonder is if Verhoeven intentionally did it this way to have that character who is so critical to the plot, like if he directed her completely differently, or do you think that it might have actually been the actress's own personal decisions that led to that? Does that question make any sense?
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's an interesting question because I don't really know. Like thinking about how all the other actors, performed, and thinking that when you brought up that Kyle MacLachlan was in Blue Velvet, I completely remember now. He's not a bad actor. So I wonder if he maybe had a personal relationship to a role like this in some way. Maybe she knows people that are in the Vegas shows, or maybe she was in it one part of her life. Because I mean, I think a lot of those people they might not become actors and actresses, but it seems to be like a shared world. Like they're not like escorts, they're not at a strip club. They're kind of like it tells you in the movie. They're seen a little above those other people. So maybe she was involved in that and got into acting at some point. Um, but I'm not sure. What do you think?
I'm not sure either. I could definitely buy the fact that she had more experience with or familiarity with those type of people, or that she was able to like connect to the storyline in a different way than everyone else. Part of me also thinks that she might have intentionally went against the grain, and maybe that's why that shined through. But also because I know that Verhoeven is he is a proven very good director. I feel like I might be discounting him too much with that. You know what I mean? Because like RoboCop is brilliant. I'm a huge fan of Total Recall, and Starship Troopers is really genius. So, you know, it's hard to say that he had the complete wrong idea going in with how they were supposed to act, and that she was the only one to see through that. So that's kind of a hard sell that I've been trying to figure out. But I think we're both in agreement that her performance, for whatever reason, did stand out the most. I think it's because it seemed you could really feel the emotion behind what type of character that was. And maybe the caricature of a type of character who's like villainous like that and manipulative, maybe that plays better and it kind of played into that role. I think it could be any one of those things.
Yeah, I think maybe in my opinion, most likely would be that she was more familiar with those types of people, and maybe she herself could be like that. I think a lot of the times the best performances we get are when, an actor can tap into something inside of them that maybe they've acted like that in real life before, something like that.
I completely agree. And I think that's also why like method actors are so successful, because it's almost like the inverse of that. Like rather than drawing upon your personality, it's like I'm gonna make my personality this so that I can be that on screen. And some of the greatest actors of our time have gone to such lengths. One that I think comes top of mind is Daniel Day-Lewis, and I think even Dustin Hoffman has done the same, and it oftentimes works out very well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I think just the over the topness of, acting and her performance and all of it, in my mind, ties into this whole Vegas scene, how it's, very showy, very extravagant. maybe Paul Verhoeven was going for that, and so he, because we both know he obviously knows what he's doing in terms of directing at this point. So maybe he was trying to direct them in that way, and maybe only some of the actors really got it, and then the ones that didn't, their performances were a little worse.
Exactly. One thing that the big point about this film is that, or I think one of the biggest selling points was Elizabeth Berkley, and you might be familiar with this as well, Matt, was fairly famous from by the Bell, where she plays like the girl next door, and to be in a film like Showgirls that was sold as a very provocative film, and probably word of mouth was that like this is a film fraught with nudity. For a lot of people was probably like the talk of the town, that it's like I can't believe this actress from like a teen show went on to do something. It's such a large change. And you made the comparison to Perfect Blue, and quite frankly, that's a perfect comparison because it is such a big change. And I kind of want to just throw it to you as to, you know, that big of a change for an actress like Elizabeth Berkley. And I think, like, how do you think audiences reacted to something like this? Because I would think a lot of people would, it would almost be like not a morbid curiosity, but a curiosity watch to see, man, I can't believe she did a movie like this.
Yeah, it reminds me even more so in terms of an actress going into doing something that's like a complete change of their image, similar to Perfect Blue, but for a real life person. Have you ever seen Spring Breakers?
I have. Oh, no, 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 no. I haven't, but I am. I do know Selena Gomez is in it.
Yeah, yeah, that's who I was gonna mention because she was just right off doing I think Wizards of Waverly Place, and so she was a Disney star, and so I know that the director of that film got her because he wanted to attract that Disney audience to this movie, and he kind of advertised it like it was going to be this, like thriller Spring Breakers movie when it ended up being a lot, actually very similar to Showgirls. And I wouldn't be surprised if Showgirls was a big inspiration for that movie. So, I think that there's a few possibilities. Maybe Paul Verhoeven wanted to do it to attract people to the movie because they see this character they know from this show that they like, and they're gonna be in this new film, and so that makes them want to go see it. But also, it's kind of like Perfect Blue, and kind of like what the director wants to do, where he would take their image and they want to change their image, and the director also wants to change it in a way that it's like morphing their character around. I mean, I guess all the reasons kind of we talked about in our Perfect Blue or a podcast that included Perfect Blue. It's just a very strange thing, I think, for the actors to go through, like as a person. But it's a very like shocking and interesting thing for to see on a film, and I think that critics, just like in Perfect Blue, tend to like when actresses and actors can totally change for a movie like that. It tends to make you go, "Wow, this person's like very versatile in their capabilities."
Yeah, I completely agree. And to kind of like dive deeper into, I guess, like how the nudity impacted this film is, I think, and I want to get your feelings on this too, but I think audience perception was able to discount this film because of the nudity. Do you think there's any truth to that? That was my personal opinion, though I haven't looked into it enough, and obviously we aren't old enough to be able to have experienced that as it was happening.
I remember I saw something in passing. I didn't read deeply into it about how I think this maybe changed the requirements or what they allowed for the NR movies, like what's above the R, like the not rated or something like that. And honestly, the nudity aspect for me, like when I was like a third of the way through the movie, I was like, I have not seen like this many like topless women in one movie, I think, ever. It just became like a normal thing to just see, topless people everywhere. And I think that he was going for one of those kinds of erotic, or people would call it sexploitation,
Mm.
where it's kind of like you're exploiting the sexual factor of, a person, or in this case, like an industry, and you're overdoing the nudity kind of to get your point across.
I think that was exactly what Verhoeven was going for. And that obviously, that saying or that word, sexploitation, comes with a very negative connotation as well. I saw some of that criticism come across from the movie Blonde. And I'm not sure if you saw any of that as well, but in terms of Anna de Armas being Marilyn Monroe, a lot of people felt like it was exploitative to use her in that role and to almost make her a sex object, much the way that Marilyn Monroe maybe was used in real life. And that might have been some of the brilliance of what that director was trying to get across, though the movie as a whole didn't quite work for me. But I think knowing Verhoeven and the mind that he has as a director, I think that's what he was going for. Did you feel like it was used effectively first, and then I guess as effectively as it could have been second?
That's interesting. So, uh, I think that he did it. I liked the way he did it only because I liked what it said about Vegas itself. Because it it kind of just showed the. I know I already said this, but like the over the top sexualization that the whole Vegas industry brings, and that's like the seediness of the strip club before, and that I think his name was Al, the guy that kind of directed that whole aspect, who was, clearly they like the dancers kind of as people, but they also treat them as just pure sex objects. So it's kind of just goes to say something about the Vegas and how people go there purely for sex, and they see, like the legal prostitutes or strippers or show people as just, purely there for their entertainment and their sexual need. And it was the same with the, people that ran the show, all the guys that were in charge. They were all there to recycle these, like, 20-ish-year-old girls and get to have sex with them themselves, make them stars, and then they age out, and then, in comes the new. So you got these honestly creepy dudes that are kind of running the whole show. And it just kind of, to me, showed me that the whole industry is just kind of icky. I don't like it's just, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. Like you know that you wouldn't want to be a part of that as your daily job unless you had those kinds of intentions.
Yeah. No, I do think that it was definitely a really creative way. and it gets its message across in a really strong way. One of the things that did throw me for a bit of a loop, and maybe you got more out of it than I did, and if you did, I would like to get like your thoughts and feelings on it, but the ending didn't make a ton of sense for me. How did you look at it, and did you get a lot out of it, I guess? And if so, kind of go into it because I would be interested.
Yeah, so that was definitely a part that I didn't like as much, and there was a few things. Like I'm gonna talk about a few things I didn't like. So the subplots, before, like the subplot with the character who is trying to teach her dance, the black guy with dreadlocks, he that never really wrapped up. I mean, we didn't really get to see that. I mean, it kind of did, but it was just kind of like he is a failed dance instructor and he sucks, and that's just like, you're left wondering like why was that even in the movie. And then same with her relationship with Kyle MacLachlan, that kind of doesn't, you never get to see their final interaction. She just kind of, leaves. But I think the biggest problem was the way that it seemed like it was very forced. The part with where that famous musician assaults her friend that she was living
Mm.
with, the main character's friend, and then she goes to visit her, and then she gets back at the musician. That just felt very random, and it was like, in my opinion, a forced plot line in order to get her to kind of see that she was in the wrong mindset. Like that whole rising to the top, she became the top showgirl. It was like we didn't really see her downfall come through. We just kind of saw her get revenge on for her friend that she didn't even really seem to care about, on this random musician. And I mean, that just felt very random to me. I would say the only part of the ending I liked was kind of how it wraps back up with that guy and her suitcase you see from the beginning. I liked that part. But besides that, the rest of it felt just very forced.
I completely agree. I think nearly everything about the side plot with her friend, with whom she was living with, that, like you said, got assaulted, like, and I generally I don't like to get into like plot holes, right? But whenever there's like other ineptitudes that kind of surround it, it almost makes that weakness all the more glaring. And so I'm going to dive into it. And the plot hole, the big glaring one, is the fact that Kyle MacLachlan's character makes it seem like it's almost his call that, like, look, we're not going to, no charges are going to get pressed. He's going to pay her off, and that's going to be the end of it. Meanwhile, like, she was brutally assaulted at a party and then came out where everyone was and was, like, devastated, like how brutally beaten she was at that point. And also, not to mention, like, she went away with that guy, and like how many eyewitnesses would have seen, hey, that girl was with this very famous person like 10 minutes prior to her showing up battered and bruised. But what you went into with it is also something that wasn't as glaring because I was very focused on that, but it did feel very forced, for that plot line to kind of be in there as a plot mechanism to get Elizabeth Berkley to make that realization. And I think had that been more creative, I think the film would have benefited greatly from that.
Yeah, yeah, what you just said, she comes out almost dead, basically,
Mm-hmm.
from after she's with the musician. And these aren't like there's no indication that these people are gangsters or that they control the police in any way. So if if that happens, that guy's gonna get prosecuted. He seemed to just be like, a famous musician, like equivalent to a famous a rock artist. Like they don't have the power to, almost kill someone at a party and then just walk off scot-free. Like that doesn't happen. Uh but yeah, like I think the part that is really it is that she herself, it's like she never, maybe he wanted to do this, but maybe this was something the producers forced in there. But it's like she never learns her lesson. Like she doesn't really have that downfall. Like I would have preferred to see someone else, like that one girl came and asked, "Hey, can I be your understudy?" at one point. I would rather see, more backstabbing happen and maybe she gets taken advantage of and then she realizes, and then comes her realization. It's not, it just seems kind of random for it to be my friend was assaulted by a guy that's not even really involved in the Vegas performances. He's just a musician that's friends with these people. And then because of that, I need to leave the industry. Just, it was very random.
You brought up a really great point, and it's very, I'll just say strange, but whenever movies almost set up like these perfect structures in the script to be utilized later on, and you just alluded to a great one that it didn't occur to me, but would have been perfect with the understudy, because like that's like a really rich kind of way in a script where the weapons that you use against other people begin to be utilized against you. So to have the understudy then to be able to do some of the stuff that she used to get to the top, that would have been a really interesting way to have like a fully fledged character arc. Because and I don't know if this was the justification that Verhoeven and the scriptwriter used, but her ending, while she doesn't get to suffer from some of the pitfalls that were certainly right around the corner, it's also not, it's not like a super happy ending for her either. And maybe that was their justification for going that direction. I don't know. How do you look at that, I guess?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It seems the thing it strikes me most as, after watching as many movies I have, and is maybe Paul Verhoeven had a certain ending and the producers did not like it, and so they trying to force this thing on because it just seems like it came out of left field, especially with her character friend that she lives with not really being involved in much of the movie, besides the part where she sees her push Connors over. And I would have much preferred to see something like you were just saying, that that girl kind of, because it was the same girl that actually said she saw her, that she didn't push her, but we all know that she just made that up. um, I would have wanted to see her maybe take advantage of Elizabeth Berkley's character. I think that would have, been more in tune with that theme I've been harping on, where it's kind of like movies about a lot of backstabbing and taking advantage of other people in order to get to the top in this seedy sort of Vegas industry. I just think that would have been much more in line with what I think he was going for. So, maybe he was scrambling and couldn't figure it ending out. Maybe it was something the producers forced on him. I don't know.
And going back a bit to when you were referring to the rating system, I think this is one of the very few films that I've watched as of recently that is an NC-17. And I guess that is different than an R rating. I don't even know. I always thought R rating you needed to be 18 to get into, but I think NC-17 is considered like one above an R-rated. Am I right or am I wrong on that? Do you happen to know?
I I do, that never made sense to me either because like all the movies with a lot of like sexual aspects to them usually have that NC-17 rating. And I think this is just me guessing that maybe you don't like think about how many times you ever gone to the theater as a kid. You saw a movie in there that was NC-17. Like never. Like it was always R or PG-13. So maybe NC-17s don't get certain widespread releases anymore. Maybe it was this movie that caused that. I don't know.
If that is the case, and I I think that is, that could very much play into the fact that this film obviously didn't recoup its money, I guess. I think logically that does make a lot of sense, and that probably changed a lot of things in Hollywood. One thing that is really interesting, kind of going into that deeply, and how ratings of movies are such a huge factor. If you look at like the superhero movies, it wasn't until there was like a actually very successful R-rated movie or R-rated superhero movie that even like the likes of Disney would take a chance on that with this upcoming Deadpool movie. Like it had to be a proven commodity because like Disney, they avoid higher ratings like the plague just because you want anyone and everyone, especially children, because it is Disney after all, to be able to see their movies. So when you limit your, you know, your demographics, like that is going to play a tremendous role.
Right, right. And it plays a big role for, what audience you're trying to capture. If you're more on the like artsy, like I'm just gonna put what I want in this movie and I'm not gearing it towards a certain audience or I'm not really trying to hit a big budget, you might take more risks and take that NC-17 rating. But if you're a big studio and your main goal honestly is to profit from the film, like maybe not the director, but all the producers, they want to profit. They're going to try and cut out as much as they can in order to get it to that lower rating. Like I'm sure in this movie, those producers were going for R, and I'm sure there was probably a big fight about what could stay in and what could get cut out to try and fit that rating.
And think about this too. I mean, after seeing the movie, both of us, I think we can attest to the fact that the probably the biggest complaint was the sexual nature and the nudity. And if they said, look, there's much too much nudity for this to just be R rated, if you were to try to skirt that and reshoot, they would have had, I mean, that would have just made the budget like they would have never ever covered that if they had to do reshoots with the amount of money that would had to been spent to that, because like you said, it was pretty much every other shot included some form of nudity.
Yeah, that this movie could not function as anything except the rating it got, because it's like the whole plot line is designed where that, and the whole all of what it's trying to say, it necessarily has to have those like extreme sexual aspects to it.
Do you think that Verhoeven was also trying to bring like a positive voice, or it seemed like he had a respect for the people in this form of entertainment, because I think he was almost trying to depict it as like honest, like people who worked in sex work or who are strippers, as opposed to, and even showgirls, I guess, through Crystal's character. Do you think that was part of the messaging he was trying to get across?
Yeah, I like knowing his other films and how he seems to see reality, and then like in his movies likes to shape it to where it's a little extra reality, but at the same time it's really saying something about the actual reality that the movie's trying to capture. I think that, it's hard to know what his opinion on like this show business was itself, but my thinking would be that maybe he didn't like, because you think he's also, he's not American. Maybe he didn't have like a huge respect for this industry, but maybe he thought it was really interesting. I'm thinking the way the movie is, it's kind of like you're going to Vegas for the first time. It's just very like bright. There's lots of colors. It's a lot of uh, crazy antics and people and really weird seedy things going on. I'm thinking maybe in my mind he could have visited Vegas and just been so intrigued by everything because like someone from America is intrigued, like someone from a different country, it's probably like they don't have anything like that over there.
Yeah, I I could, because he is Dutch. I wonder if he has the perspective that he's more accepting of it, because I do think Amsterdam has very loose laws when it comes to drugs and prostitution. Are you familiar with that at all?
Yeah, no, they do. In my mind, it was the big showman aspect of it. Like,
Mm.
I don't think they don't do things to that big, like, huge stages, super bright cities, all the colors. I think that might have been what he was interested in.
I agree with you, because Vegas is essentially there. I mean, I'm not like a worldly man, but to my knowledge, there is truly nothing like Vegas, and it is like so outwardly like trying to promote things that aren't generally, they're not like super socially acceptable, like strip clubs, like bars, like casinos, and even like fighting. Honestly, I mean, like the boxing and MMA capitals of the U.S. are. You could make a very good argument that Las Vegas is a very important, you know, geographic location for that. So it is very interesting where that one concentrated place in the world, it has made its name on, I guess, exploiting, for lack of a better term, the vices of the world at large.
Yeah, it's a very exploitative place, and I'm sure that, the Netherlands obviously has that stuff because they're very open, and there's like open about like sex and drugs. And I just think when you see the American version of that, it's like this weird mix of being like commercialized to like way over the top. Like you'd think like compare like a Vegas strip club to like a Netherlands one. Like I don't really never been to one in either place or know anything about them, but in my mind, the Netherlands one would probably just be much more uh, like relaxed, and it could get wild, but it's not going to be anything like these huge auditoriums or all these lights and just this over the top abundance where you see uh and not only that, but like the people that go to Vegas, I feel like have more of a dream to become maybe a celebrity and famous. And maybe over in the Netherlands, it's kind of like, hey, I just accepted the fact that I'm a sex worker, and it is what it is. And they don't have that same like drive that someone uh like like Christy Collins character, or sorry, Christy Collins, or Nomi, or I think was her name, Elizabeth Berkley's character. Like those types of people you might not find in the Netherlands.
I agree with you, and this is obviously just my perception as well, but it seems like it's more of a job in one place, that being like Amsterdam, and then it's like an aspiration in Vegas because there is glamour and fame to it, as opposed to it almost kind of being like an unspoken, like, town of, like, it's like an unspoken secret in Amsterdam, whereas Vegas is so overt about it.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Now, I think there's definitely the distinction to be made that Paul Verhoeven, who obviously had a track record going into this film, and despite the fact that it wasn't a box office success, later goes on to make Starship Troopers, which I don't know the financials on, but is considered a very good film amongst film buffs. Both of us, I think, very much enjoyed that film, but the same can't be said for Elizabeth Berkley. I guess from my perspective, I don't know if she ever went on to lead a movie that had as much, resources put into it, and I don't, at least to my knowledge, didn't go on to have a very successful career after this film. And do you have any thoughts on that, Matt? Do you think the performance was. Do you think the failure of the film as a financial element played a huge role to that? Or do you think a lot of directors and producers and whatnot saw the performance and were unimpressed, and that was what led to her maybe not getting any roles nearly as big as this one in the future?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those movies where, it comes out and it has terrible ratings. And, that's from the critics and the audience at first. But then somehow that becomes a cult classic, which seems to happen with a lot of movies. And, I haven't seen that movie Blonde, but from the reception it got, I feel like I don't know who started that movie, but I feel like their careers might take a hit. I feel like whoever directed that movie, Blonde's career is going to take a big hit. Companies aren't going to trust him to make movies any as much anymore. And that just kind of, for these actors and directors, it can tank any potential they had in the industry, which is unfortunate. But you get these, I would say, cool and also one of my favorite types of I don't know if you want to call it like a movie trend or just something that seems to happen where I'm guessing 20 years down the line, people are going to say, this Blonde movie is actually really good and here's why. I think a lot of it is just that initial hate spreads quickly.
I would agree with you because I think negative reviews tend to spread like wildfire, while you need like a strong consensus of positive reviews for that to really like become something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, like you need like groups of people to come back and be like, "Hey, wait, like this movie was actually trying to say these things." And it's almost like the movie changes because people's perspective on the movie changes. And I think that happened with Showgirls for sure.
I want to ask you, Matt, what was your rating on this film? And I guess, like, any closing thoughts on Showgirls?
So this was a hard one for me to rate. Because I feel like structurally, like, and especially the ending, it just makes you go, this is like, this movie is missing something. It's not fully put together. So I have a hard time with like the 4 stars I gave it. I don't feel like that's accurate, but at the same time, I like the movie enough. I like what it says about the Vegas industry. And I tend to just like exploitation types of movies in general because I feel like although it's negative, like truly a lot of exploitation things are depicting reality. So that's just the kind of thing I have always found that I personally like when I watch movies. So that's kind of my rating, and I feel like we really covered everything I wanted to about this movie.
Yeah, I, much like you, I had my issues with this film. I felt like there was enough positives to outweigh the negatives. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 because I think that, you know, it was as a whole, if you're to take the whole bag, there it is, comes out net positive. But to your point, I think that it allows you to become a part of a very interesting conversation because Showgirls is such a polarizing movie. It's worth watching just to become a part of that conversation. And that's honestly, that was the sales pitch as to why I wanted to watch this myself.
Yeah, yeah, I think definitely, check this out if you're willing to, give something a shot and like a controversial movie a shot and then really get to form your own opinion on this kind of thing. I think is fun to do.
I completely agree. And as you were saying about Showgirls and how there's such a mixed perspective, the same can be said about Basic Instinct. I was actually very surprised to see that on Rotten Tomatoes this has a 54. I think they was the critic score, I believe, and this one certainly, it has its elements that weren't that a lot of people criticize that I think are valid criticisms, but this was a very interesting movie for sure. And one of the characters that I think stands out from this film is Sharon Stone's character. We were talking about this prior to recording, but I thought her performance was pretty lights out in this one. What impressed you about this film, and how did you feel about Sharon Stone's performance?
Her performance was intoxicating, is the way I would describe it. What I liked most about this movie is how, well, I would say that the twists were a little confusing sometimes. That would be like my biggest downside of the film. But the upside was the way that I guess it was like when she was on screen, there was a certain aura about her, and you can just feel. It's like you can feel the detective getting sucked into her evil plot. And I just liked that. It's like it. There was this like this hanging aura or vibe that she gave off that you can kind of just feel through the movie.
Yes. And it made this movie work very, very well. And we were talking about Verhoeven's style, and maybe you feel the same, and if not, I would like to get your insight on it. But this felt kind of distinct from his other films because it didn't seem to follow that same path, as though like the actors didn't feel nearly as stilted as in a Total Recall, a Starship Troopers, or a RoboCop, or a Showgirls as well. Does that track for you? And if not, would you speak to that?
Yeah, yeah, it does. It felt like a much more conventional plot, I'd say, a type of movie that wasn't, you could say like Starship Troopers was trying to, or like kind of made a statement about like the military and war, and Showgirls made a statement about uh like the show business and sexual themes, and Total Recall makes a statement about like f- kind of like futuristic types of themes. And I haven't seen RoboCop, but I'm guessing it says something about the police, whereas this is more uh like a contained story. Like it's more about the characters.
Exactly. And that seems to, I guess, allow for such strong performances because obviously Sharon Tate, we both were very, very impressed by her. I thought Michael Douglas did a tremendous job as well. And this, a lot of critics have said feels much like a kind of Hitchcock esque or Hitchcock inspired type of thriller. And I can certainly see that. And I think that's a really strong compliment for any thriller.
Yeah, like the Hitchcock Ian, or however you want to say it, part really kicked in for me with all those twists and how things connected. But at the same time, I felt, I didn't know if I was right, but the whole time I kind of felt like, she's obviously, the bad one here.
Yeah, it definitely it leaned into that so much where it seemed insurmountable to where it's like there at a certain point, and this is probably like how you were feeling, it's like there's no way that the plot is going to be able to do something that turns her into like not the actual villain.
Right, right. And that was the only, I'd say, part that maybe Hitchcock does a little better because in most Hitchcock movies I find myself guessing still, like maybe up towards the end, like who did it or what's going on, especially in a movie like Rear Window, where for this it was like to me it was obvious that she did it, but it was like it's so obvious yet she can still trap them in her spell, which to me that's it's really good. Like it's good storytelling and it's interesting just for a different reason.
Yeah, and speaking to how you said she was intoxicating, it's almost like the performance was so transcendent that the audience is able to be allured by her as well. Like the performance was that good that it is believable for Michael Douglas to fall into that spell, even though it's quite clear to the audience that she is manipulating him.
Yeah, like she gives off this major just I don't want to say it's like kind of like the way I was talking about uh the way I was talking about Crystal Connors from the last movie. It's like the way she looks at the characters and and her lines too. I'm talking about Crystal Collins and Sharon Stone's character in this movie. It's like this alluring, provocative type look where you as the audience, or I found myself getting sucked in as well and being like, for some reason this seems attractive, like in a way, like it makes me want to find out more about her, kind of like Michael Douglas's character did. Like it kind of, it's like it's wrong. It's like I guess one of those things where, and maybe that's why the movie's called Basic Instinct, because like you feel the danger and it's wrong, yet you're still drawn to it.
And two of the things that I really loved about this movie plot wise was the kind of added character element that Sharon Stone was an author who wrote about the crimes that she was going to commit, which is, I don't know. Some people might take issue with that. I thought it was interesting, and it could be done poorly, but in this film, I thought it was done well. And the second thing was the added twist of the police psychiatrist, I think is her job title, but the person with whom Michael Douglas had a previous relationship with, that she had that connection to Sharon Stone. I thought that was really, really interesting, and it was something that they planted the seeds early and gave little snippets of information for that plot line to not just feel like a sudden reveal where it's like, oh, what the hell? Like, this girl knew her in college and was doing things for her as well. And there was even some suspense where when Michael Douglas, shoots her, you're not quite sure at that moment. That was the moment where the ground was very unstable for me as to like trying to figure out what was what, and kept it very, very interesting. Now the ending, I want to get to that later because a lot of people feel like they kind of fumbled the ending a little bit, but I will say those 2 points certainly stuck out to me as being very, very positive things about this movie.
Yeah, I would say, that moment he shoots her is that Hitchcock moment for me. It's the
Mm-hmm.
moment like where I thought they brought that twist in really well, and then you really aren't, you're I still believed it was who it ended up being, but I kind of for a minute there was thinking maybe it was the psychologist or the police psychologist. And you kind of end up not knowing. The movie's good at tricking you in that way. And in terms of like the whole author aspect, I liked that part because we've talked about this before, how we both have an interest in true crime, and I just the other day watched this like true crime video about this girl who killed her husband and then wrote a book about it after. Like I think her name was like Corey Richin or something like that, and she I mean it's not like the plot from this movie or anything, but I mean that kind of stuff happens. People are weird like that sometimes.
I agree, and not saying that I'm an expert in any way whatsoever, but I will say, from my perspective, felt like Verhoeven really nailed the psychology of Sharon Stone's character. I think that was what allowed her performance to excel as much as it did, because those type of psychotic killers in history, generally like those serial killers, one like to boast about their crimes in one way or another. Son of Sam comes to mind. The Zodiac Killer comes to mind. It's obviously a different medium, being books, but also you have a lot of killers who have no problem going in and being interrogated because it's a way for them to almost show or try to show their superiority over the people that are investigating them, and that ties very directly into the taunting through either writing to the police, writing to the newspapers, or in this case writing a book. So whatever research he did for this film, I think it tracked very well, and I appreciated it. If I don't know, I did you feel the same way?
Yeah, this is obviously when you have a movie like this, it's a little bit of an exaggeration of, what a real serial killer would be like, like how alluring they are and charming. It's definitely possible, uh, that they're acting like this, but usually, I would say the psychology, sorry, to get to your point, the psychology is definitely on point here. Like this is a rare type of person that has the combination of liking to kill people, and being like having no remorse and being extraordinarily charming and very good looking. Like when you have all these factors in one person, you have a very dangerous person, and that's you know someone like Ted, like a Ted Bundy too, was known to be super charming. He was smart, and he just happened to also like to kill people. And you've got like one of the most who will become one of the most infamous people of his time period. Uh, so like how the or I feel like I'm missing a point of what you said. Did I answer that?
No, you answered it perfectly, but you brought up something that didn't occur to me until just now because I think generally you don't see it as much this way, in that, like you said, Ted Bundy was. I mean, this might be an overstatement, but I mean, he had like fangirls who were just like in awe of him and thought he was like super attractive and charming. And, you know, he almost had like little groupies. And obviously, he was in prison. But because of what we know about Verhoeven and how brilliant he can be, it didn't occur to me until just now, but it seems as though Verhoeven was trying to flip the script and show how easily that can happen as like if it was a female serial killer. Did, I don't know if that was a fully fledged thought or if that makes sense to you, but to put a male audience into the Sims like that sensation that happens very frequently with male serial killers. And it doesn't happen as frequently the other way just because there's not as frequent female serial killers. Obviously, that does happen, but it's not done at the frequency of male serial killers. But do you think that was part of what Verhoeven was trying to capture?
Actually, I hadn't thought of that either until you just said it. And, I think that's a really good point. I think that he might have been going for something like that because you have that's part of the big, I guess, unusual part of this movie would be the fact that the serial killer is a woman, and you never see that in real life. I mean, there have been, I think, a couple, but they're all usually the type to like poison a patient or a series of patients, and that's kind of how they get that serial killer status. You never really have a woman who's a serial killer and kills violently. And so I think that's a really interesting point, the fact that it's kind of flipped to where it's usually the male serial killer. We see how he charms the women in order to, get them into his his spell so that he can kill them. And you don't really see how it could be done from a female character perspective. And now, it's really interesting to think about it like that, because now I'm thinking, how easy would that be for a woman who's a serial killer and happens to be, really attractive, to just use that. She could just use that charm and charm, police officers themselves, which, like you were saying earlier, they tend to like to toy with the cops, and she can just do it easily here. And not only guys she's charming, but she's charming other girls, to putting them under her spell too. I think it really kind of actually changes the way I see the movie in a good way.
Yeah, it didn't occur to me until you brought up the whole Ted Bundy comparison, which I think is a very astute comparison. And I think what makes it interesting is because you're blinded when watching this film, but when you hear about a Ted Bundy, I think it's because he's a male. It's like a lot of men probably look at him and are able to kind of see him more easily for what he is. Like, you might see him as like a sleazeball, and because you're not falling for the tricks that he's trying to throw out there. And obviously you think he's very charismatic, but how this film is able to flip that on its head is like it's very brilliant. And I think it's only Verhoeven is one of a very small group of directors who would be able to do something like that is almost, it transcends the movie itself and speaks on society as a whole.
Yeah, because you're seeing this, like, I want to say, like, erotic charm from Sharon Stone's character, where you see that in movie, you see that in even a movie like Showgirls, but you don't see it in a character who you know's desire is to kill. And I kind of, when I was watching this movie, thought myself like, wow, like I would probably fall for something like this because it's the whole the whole story, the story that's been throughout human history where you're attracted to, it's bad and it's alluring, but you still do it anyways. It's like you can't help yourself. You like, it's that, I don't, it's not morbid curiosity, but that like that attraction that like it brings you towards it. And for whatever reason, we don't really see a lot of stories where you have like female killers attracting male uh, victims through their promiscuity or through these like tactics that she uses, and then they end up killing it. That's just not a typical story, and I think it's a very interesting one to tell that you don't really see.
One of the common criticisms amongst people who haven't don't rate this positively is the ending. Matt, I want to get your perspective on the ending. How do you think it was handled? Do you think it was a good ending? If not, what did you dislike about it?
It to me, it didn't disappoint me as much as the Showgirls ending, but it was just kind of like okay, because like it's like she's the killer the whole time,
Mm-hmm.
but then you're like maybe not after the psychologist thing happens, and then like I was expecting her to kill him at the end, and it doesn't happen, and honestly when it ended, I was just kind of like, okay, like it wasn't, to me, it wasn't like terrible, but it wasn't like I wasn't excited about it. It was just kind of like bleh. Like, like what did you think?
I'm with you because it didn't hold up to the entirety of the movie up until that point. I think it didn't. There was so much brilliance through the first whatever, like maybe 2 hours, if I'm remembering the runtime correctly, and it fell a little bit flat for me. But like you said, in comparison to Showgirls, it wasn't like it took it down. It's just it would have been. I think the expectations was for it to end on a very high note, and it didn't quite hit that high note.
Yeah, yeah, it was just, for me, exactly. I was just kind of like, whatever. Like, I feel like the peak of the movie came before the ending, and I'm not really sure. It was just, to me, it was just like, wow, I knew she was the killer the whole time. I expected that, and I was right. And and like that, and like that's it. And maybe it would have been even better if they never showed you that ice pick.
I agree. I agree. Honestly, maybe if it would have ended shorter, if that part wasn't included, that would have done justice for this film. And what I thought was going to be the ending was that Michael Douglas was going to go to jail for shooting, because that was such a plot line that was thrown in time and time again, how he had shot I forget, he shot like bystanders and was able to get off of it even though he was on cocaine during killing bystanders, which it would have been like a kind of a justice of some sorts, and it would have also played into one of the statements that Stone said to Douglas, in that there needs to be a murder, and he like offers the other position of, he's like, why can't it end another way? So I was thinking that the movie was like foreshadowing the fact that maybe Douglas wasn't going to die, but he wasn't going to have a good fate either.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. That never really gets wrapped up. His whole bad all of his bad actions while he's a cop. Uh, yeah, I just it in the only way I could see the ending working is if it, and they don't make this. This isn't indicated at all, but as if it's some kind of fantasy where they end up falling in love and liking each other. But really, it's just like he falls into her trap. He ends up being a character in her story. And the way I would have like expected it more to go down, or what I guess would have made a little more sense, is if, she follows through and maybe he gets killed or he gets in trouble finally for all those, all the like the shootings and the other trouble he got in with the police. And I feel like he didn't really get repercussions for that. And he just, uh, kind of like, I don't know if you ever seen Bad Lieutenant, but kind of like that movie, he just like keeps being a bad cop throughout the whole film and he keeps getting away with it. And it's kind of like his character ends up being a little like wishy-washy where he ends up just kind of being purely a puppet of Sharon Stone's character, and that's kind of like it for him, like he's just the puppet.
Yeah. So and it also it seemed like it went against the nature of Sharon Stone's character as well, that because she seems to just purely use people. Like she's such a manipulative psychopath or sociopath. I'm not sure which one would be more fitting, but she just uses and discards people like a tissue paper, and for her to be reserved to the fate of, okay, I'm gonna marry him and then we'll travel the world. Doesn't it didn't fit her character. The remainder or the whole movie up until that point worked. Like it seemed like she would have been more interested in getting one over on him and then also being able to use him and then be done with him in one fashion or another. So, I think, and the movie almost goes that direction. It gets so close that it flirts with the direction of Douglas both facing repercussions and her being able to get off scot free. That I think that's why people were not as thrilled with the ending, because it came so close to doing something that I think would have been more effective.
Right, right. I guess, in my mind, the simplest way to put it is both their characters didn't really end up following from the rest of the story. It was kind of like not not like they force things out of left field, but it's like the plot develops and it's making sense, but then it kind of leads to a point where you're just like, why did the characters end up like this? Like there wasn't anything in previous parts of the movie that would kind of indicate that this was going to happen. It actually would show that the opposite was going to happen.
Because I think Verhoeven is someone who you can generally give the benefit of the doubt just because of his track record and all the things that he seems to think through very thoroughly. Personally, I can't think of a reason, but do you think there was something underlying that he was trying to communicate with the direction he decided to go with the ending?
Hmm. Now, I don't know because all that, in my mind, all that really happens is that it's revealed that she was the killer the whole time. But, for me, what would have, what I would have felt like wrapped it up better is it would have been like the how the beginning of Showgirls and the ending of Showgirls was kind of her in that car. Well, the beginning of this movie was her, stabbing the singer to death, and the ending of it should have been her stabbing, the detective to death, because she was previously writing about a story about the singer. Now she's writing a story about the detective. It would kind of all wrap up better in my mind if it was like that. So I don't know. I don't know why Verhoeven uh, ended it the way he did.
I'm going to toss something at you, and it might be very far fetched, or maybe you'll find an interesting nugget of an idea there, or here rather. But if we're to follow the string that you kind of illuminated, in that this is almost like a story of like a Ted Bundy-esque character flipped on its head by changing the gender of the killer. Do you think that this, because it feels like a fairy tale ending, right? I think maybe it's like this is for all like the fangirls of like a Ted Bundy, Michael Douglas is like the personification of that. In that this is the ending, or the life that the fantastical life that the people who have that attraction to those killers, they think that life will be like if they were to actually be with those people. Like when they imagine, like, well, if I was Ted Bundy, if I was with Ted Bundy, he would stop being a killer for me. And that this is the movie, like, showcasing that fantasy that a lot of the people who are fans of those killers have.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, because I think that what we see through the movie is, in a way, when it's flipped, when it's someone like Ted Bundy that's the killer, there's this weird phenomenon, and I don't think people have really been able to explain this scientifically yet. But why these serial killers have like fangirls, and and maybe it is that idea that they think they could fix them. They think that, oh well, if he just meets me, I'll be able to change him. But here, when it's flipped around, it's I think it's the male desire as opposed to like the female desire is a little different. Um it's like this, like she's beautiful, and she's clearly, you know, bad and evil. And for some reason, I think you see this in real life too, the attraction, or like the attraction of a male to a female that's definitely no good for him is sometimes way stronger than it would be to just, a regular partner, or someone that would be attractive, but it's that excitement. And I think that it's that male psychopath and the serial killer type people can also bring that excitement to a woman's life in the opposite way, because it's like when you're with these types of people, the fact that they have no fear and don't care, and there's just that aura of this is wrong, but that makes it more exciting and fun, and I like it more, is uh it's just it just draws people in. And it's like the forbidden fruit, I think, is what I was trying to, like, is the term I was trying to get across this whole time. That that really is what is being shown here, I think. And it's just showing maybe the male to female version of that, instead of like the Ted Bundy female drawn to the male. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you make some really good points. And what makes this film really impressive is that it is able to perfectly capture that. And I think you're right. I think it does allude much more to the forbidden fruit, because, and I don't want this to get misconstrued, and I'll explain it a little bit afterwards, because, like, I think the people who do these dastardly acts are more cowardly than anything. But I think those people who have that affinity can perhaps look at someone who is ultra violent and animalistic and see those as like masculine traits. And one of the ties that I'll put into that is because, if you look at like what I would consider to be a very, masculine type of occupation would be like a professional fighter. Because of how violent it is and how driven you have to be successful in that. So for it to work on the flip side, because masculinity isn't going to be as mainstream, alluring, or attractive, it had to be like the exciting forbidden fruit. And I think that's what works, and I think that's why your description as being intoxicating was so spot on.
Yeah, like I think of, like the fight, like a UFC fighter, and how they exhibit like pure like power and dominance and masculinity, and that attracts, a certain type of person is drawn to that for whatever reason. I think it may be, I think it's part a social thing, and I think it's also partly like a genetic biological thing. I think it's a little mix of both. And it's something that's almost inexplicable. Like, people will argue for ages on why, you this is like something like a dominance and masculinity is super attractive, or why it's not attractive, or why it should or shouldn't be, and what does constitute that. And I think the same thing can be said about this the type of character that Sharon Stone plays in this movie. This type of weird, like, it's like she knows what she's doing. It's like she could. It's like the scene where she seemed to captivate the entire police force that was questioning her in a way. Like, yeah, it was mostly the main detective who she was captivating, but like they couldn't get a read on her really. She was running the interrogation. And that's something you see mostly with like super, extreme psychopathic killers like a Paul Bernardo, and those people are pretty much always male, which is just the interesting part of this film. I think for me is how that's flipped around, and how it's shown in the reverse point of view.
Yeah, I think what makes her character one of the best villains, one of the most memorable and truly iconic. One point I want to go to. You mentioned Paul Bernardo. Was he one of the Hillside Stranglers, or can you remind me what? Because I know that he is a serial killer, but what does he have like a nomenclature like that?
Yeah, he was Canadian, and I think he was called the like Scarborough Rapist, and he had a like female partner in crime who was his wife. And they're also called, I think, like Ken and Barbie killers, because they were both like very attractive, and I think they even killed like his wife's sister, her like younger sister or something like that. It was like the crimes that he committed were extremely brutal.
I have heard about him, and a very interesting aspect to that is the wife of Paul Bernardo, because a lot of people who have kind of done deep dives into that have kind of made the point that the wife, despite probably being much more involved with the murders, I think got off relatively scot free. Now, she might have served some time or been charged in some capacity, but am I correct in that? Do you remember? I feel like she did not get nearly the punishment that Bernardo got.
Yes, from my recollection, that's exactly right. And, you know, like it, related to the movie, I just think it's interesting that, you know, it's always like if there's a female male killer, the male's like the one in charge, and or at least people perceive that as him directing it, and she's just kind of going along with it, you know, whereas this movie, it would be the complete, she didn't really have a male like partner in crime, but if she did, she would be the one in charge.
I what you just said might have just cracked the case on this one, and I'm gonna go down a complete path that I could be completely wrong on this, because from the start you're like, I think that's Tate, but it might not have been, and her girlfriend could have very easily been the woman at the beginning. And the film kind of tries to throw you down that path. And at the end, I think much like you was under the impression that that was Tate. But there is a potential that that might have been the girlfriend, and that the reason she didn't, you know, pull the trigger on murdering Michael Douglas was like the fatal attraction that Paul Bernardo's partner had with him. It was like she was drawn to people who had, like, not homicidal urges, but could be used as like a pathway to murder. And I think maybe that was why she didn't kill him. And in making that point, why she was with the girlfriend originally. Does that make any sense, or is there major plot holes that I'm overlooking to make that point?
No, I actually think that's interesting, and I was thinking earlier about how one of the most, you know, like parts of the movie that stuck out to me when I was thinking about it is how, it's like, you almost see her face at the beginning doing the killing, but then like the whole movie kind of puts that into question. And throughout the movie, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, you know, maybe it's her girlfriend. I think her name was Roxy.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking, you know, the only other possibility would be that it was her. And, and what you said about, you know, her being attracted, I think that that is an interesting point, and especially because the several times they mention and they argue about whether Roxy likes to watch them have
Mm-hmm.
sex, if she likes it. And that just, you know, that makes you realize that she she almost surely watched her kill that rock star at the beginning, and you don't know if it was her idea. And okay, it probably wasn't her idea, you know, knowing Sharon Stone's character, but it was probably something like the Paul Burrow situation, where Sharon Stone's character over time was charismatic and convincing and manipulative enough to convince her it was a good idea, along with the fact that Roxy probably had uh, had a liking for homicide for whatever reason. So like those factors, you know, taken together, she kind of is interested in it, and she's being manipulated to watch and maybe even promote it, or like tell her how she might do it or be involved in some way. It's just got this weird like uh not twist, but just kind of like a bunch of different things going on at once where you're not really sure, and it kind of brings up interesting questions.
I, you know, this film has, in some ways, it reminds me a bit of Blowout, which is the Brian De Palma film that we covered with John Travolta. In that there's kind of those different lenses that you can look at it through, that I think makes this very interesting, that weren't immediately apparent either. So I have to give this film a lot of credit for that. Do you see any similarities between the two as well?
What like name like the similarity you're thinking of.
The the major one was just, and I think this is maybe personal to me because I think the way you interpreted the ending, like I think you got it right away, and I did not. But the fact that it leads you to question the entire motive of the main character when the ending happens with the blowout. Whenever you hear the recording of the girl dying, it makes after talking it through with you, it made me completely look at all of his actions differently. And now looking at the ending of this film, if you're to look at it through that lens, it does make me look at the entire film a lot differently.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that because, if you take that ending for what it is, and you don't think like I'm inclined to think, oh, like she would kill him eventually, or this is a dumb ending. But if you just take it as for what it is, then I think it could be interpreted in that way. You could all of a sudden start thinking, did she kill off all the people who were maybe encouraging her to kill, or they were like she really did like Michael Douglas's character? I mean, it's strange, but you can kind of reanalyze, reinterpret the movie, and see her as telling the truth more so than she actually was. She had the ice pick there, but you could also say, that was Roxy left it there or something, or maybe Sharon Stone's character is only wanting to kill if all these other like factors are in play, like someone's watching, or she can trick or manipulate someone, or she has some kind of end game. But maybe without that, she really did like Michael Douglas's character, and she really was like instinctually just like drawn to him. It brings a lot more questions in for sure.
One thing that I have to say is I think Sharon Stone, as far as villain goes, is in a very special category because she jumped very close to the top of the list, but I don't think there are a ton of villains who have been played quite as well for that kind of manipulative mastermind. How does she rank for you? And I guess to my mind, I'm having trouble thinking of someone who was portrayed as brilliant a mastermind as she was in this film.
Yeah, in terms of villains, I can't think of another, especially not with, the main character played by a female character who is this like charming and manipulative and able to control and kind of shape her reality the way she wants it. And she's brilliant, and she can kind of like, she sets all these things in motion. It's like she knows what everyone's going to do. That kind of like cunning villain uh like villain like actions or mindset is almost like exclusively left to, like a villain you would see, like a villain mastermind you'd see in maybe like even like a any typical movie. Like think of like any movie where you have a villain, like a superhero movie where they're, plotting to destroy the world. Like they have all these people under them that's like they're directing them, and they're trying to get this ending that they want. You almost never see uh just like someone that's a female character that's able to purely charm all these people on her own. I think this is a very good villain character. I'm struggling to think of a movie uh, with a character like this as well. I don't know if you've come up with anything.
No, I was racking my mind, but I mean, you made a really good comparison. Is the this like a superhero villain or even like a Bond villain? Like she has a
Mhm.
lot in common with them as far as cunning goes, but I think the main difference is you generally see their plans foiled. So for the movie to go all the way and have them be successful is the distinct difference between the two, and I think what makes the character so special.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's exactly it. And you know, you always see the good, you know, the quote good guys prevail at the end. And here it's funny because you know Michael Douglas's character isn't really good either.
Yeah, exactly. I That's what makes the chemistry between the two, not only the chemistry but also the characterizations of the two, really really interesting. And I think this, for what Verhoeven was able to do with all of his filmography, like he's able to really portray films and do things that, like, it's not even just the same. Like the satirical masterpiece that Starship Troopers is, and even RoboCop is, Basic Instinct is its own beast, and that's like two very different lanes of genius that very few directors are able to do something like that. Like Kubrick is someone, it's vastly different than Verhoeven, but he has his own styles that he's able to kind of lend to different genres. But Verhoeven is a very special director, to be sure.
Yeah, he's got, you know, these big budget movies, but he always seems to tell interesting stories that uh are like a they have a little more to them than just your typical big budget movie. You know, there's always something more to dissect out of them.
Yeah, exactly. Matt, I want to ask you, what is your rating on Basic Instinct, and any final thoughts?
My rated this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Final thoughts. I think this is a great movie if you're looking for like a psychological thriller or a Hitchcockian type movie to watch.
Yeah, I gave this one a 4 out of 5. I think it's great as well. And I think there is, with Verhoeven, I think knowing what type of director he is going in is going to, and discussing it after the fact, is how you achieve the most from him, for sure. Matt, I want to just throw this out there. I watched, I think it's called Primal Fear. It has Richard Gere and Edward Norton in it, which is like a great, what do they call it? Not procedural. I think that's only police films, but a case, a trial. Have you seen that film yet?
I saw that you watched that movie. Yes, I have. I love that movie. I think it's really I'll just say like the ending of that movie, I actually did not see that coming.
I thought it was a great movie, and Norton's performance was absolutely brilliant. Was there anything that really stuck out to you through the trial that, like, didn't make sense, or like wasn't true to life, I guess?
Oh, honestly, it wasn't. I'd probably watched that movie like 6 months ago at this point. Um, you know, from memory, I think thinking back, like when I watched it, nothing stood out like in the verdict where it was kind of like took me out of it in terms of the trial. Um, I would say, you know, watching it again, I would probably see a lot of things. uh, but what I really liked now that I'm thinking about that movie, I really I obviously Edward Norton's performance was great, but I loved Richard Gere's portrayal as that attorney. I think he is a really accurate portrayal of someone who is a defense attorney that gets caught up in defending honestly just defending any criminal because that mindset that he has in that film is really what I haven't ever experienced being a defense attorney, but I feel like that is the mindset you have to be successful defense lawyer when you're trying to work these cases for these people are guilty, and then you have a case like Primal Fear where if he's guilty or not is really in question. I just think that whole movie is really well done with that whole psychological aspect and the whole lawyer aspect.
Yeah, I love how Norton was able to kind of flip Richard Gere's whole perspective on its head, and that he broke his illusion of being able to feel like he achieved justice. And that makes that movie so special. The one technical question that I wanted to ask, and the way it was portrayed in the movie made it feel like it had to be true, but I didn't know, so I wanted to ask you, is the prosecution the only one that is allowed to introduce new evidence? And I'm alluding to the videotape that got introduced, like, I guess at the halfway point, or maybe actually at the very end of the trial.
No, see, that's the kind, like when you see anything in like a legal proceeding where it's like all of a sudden they're introducing this evidence that no one's seen. That's never accurate. Like it's a very vetted process to where you go through and you have this period called discovery, and that's when each side has to give the other side everything that they might present at trial. And this happens way before trial. This happens in like pretty much every case where there is litigation. If you get to the discovery point, it's just almost none of those will go to trial. So that video would have had to have been turned over initially. It's a judge would call a mistrial if something like that would happen. The whole case would be thrown out and they'd have to restart the entire process.
So, in the way they went about it, where it wasn't shown to the courtroom, but it was alluded to in questioning, would that also cause for a mistrial? Or is that like a legal loophole where they were able to explain a crucial piece of evidence without actually bringing it into the courtroom itself?
That's a good question that so I'm actually taking next semester a class called Evidence where I will definitely know the answer to that. But if I had to guess right now, I think that if you alluded to, because what would happen is if that evidence wasn't allowed in, it would be the judge would rule it out. And to my knowledge, I don't think you could reference that or like allude to it so that the jury knows about it, because that would be just as damaging as it's just like in the verdict when they introduced that evidence that uh, but then like the judge is like, oh, like y'all didn't, jury, like you have to act like you didn't hear this, but then they make their decision based off it anyways. Like that kind of stuff is not fly in the courtroom, and a judge is gonna know when a lawyer's trying to do that, and he's gonna like put a stop to it. I don't know exactly what he would do, but they they would not allow that. Judges get really uptight about that kind of thing.
Yeah, I didn't think so, and I'm glad I asked you, because I was like, I don't, because based on our discussion from the verdict, I felt like that went against that, and after speaking to you, it makes a lot more sense that it does seem to almost fall more in line with that than what the film tries to portray. But very, very interesting for sure. I want to say thank you for coming on, Matt. This was an awesome, awesome discussion, man. These two films were very, very interesting, and I think a lot of people would be interested in watching these as well. So thank you for recommending them.
Of course, thanks for having me. I agree. I think these are great films that I could show to almost anyone and they'd enjoy.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for watching, and we will catch you guys on the Flippity Floop. Bye, y'all.